this issue. But here's the facts. Due to ATF's unilateral and unconstitutional action, okay?
And I was sharing with you my knowledge of a program in which ATF has defined this term.
Joe Biden stood on the debate stage with all the other Democratic candidates and said, the firearm industry is the enemy.
Weapons ban is constitutional. So we know dangerous and unusual weapons are outside the scope altogether.
I want to be clear, this wasn't based on violence. This is based on threats specifically to individuals, on gangs.
Shutting down businesses. Utah firearms dealer Jeffrey Luck knows his customers are frustrated when they hear it takes $200 and as long as 9 months to process a federal application to buy a firearm silencer. But the law is the law, and as the licensed owner of Darkside Tactical, Luck says he stays on the right side of it. So imagine Luck's annoyance when he learned earlier this year that an unlicensed business had popped up on the internet using a name almost identical to his, Darkside Defense, and that it was selling a device often used as an illegal substitution for a silencer. Dubbed solvent traps, the devices are cylinders, typically made of metal, that can be attached to the barrel of an arm for the supposed purpose of catching cleaning fluids. But if one is left on a firearm and the weapon is fired, the device dampens the noise produced by the arm shot, mimicking the function of a silencer. Luck thinks the devices are almost never used as anything but silencers, and many experts agree with him. It's frustrating for those of us who are actually in the industry when some fringe element pops up and tries to skirt the rules, Luck said. Luck said he sent the owner of Darkside Defense multiple letters demanding that he stop using a name that could so easily confuse customers and harm his own reputation. He didn't hear back. Later, he learned that federal agents had resolved the matter for him. In February, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives seized Darkside Defense's website, citing its sale of solvent traps. A posting on the agency's website describing the closure of Darkside Defense said that it had determined that these solvent traps are in fact silencers, and that it is a violation of the National Firearms Act to manufacture, receive, transport, or deliver a silencer that has not been registered. The bust is one of several enforcement actions carried out by the agency targeting websites that sell the devices. In another case, SD Tactical Arms of Prescott, Arizona, said on Facebook that the ATF forced it to stop selling solvent traps, which the store said accounted for 99% of its income. In a third case, Solvent Traps Etc. in Winter Haven, Florida, also posted on its Facebook page that ATF had shut it down for selling solvent traps. The ATF declined to comment on any of the cases because they are ongoing. The trace could not find a working number for the owner of Darkside Defense. The owners of SD Tactical Arms and Solvent Traps Etc. could not be reached for comment. The solvent trap controversy comes against the backdrop of a national debate over how silencers should be regulated. At present, silencers fall under the National Firearms Act. An individual wishing to own one must fill out a special application with the ATF, pass a background check, submit fingerprints, and pay a $200 tax. It can take months for the ATF to process an application. Once a buyer is cleared to own a silencer, the device must be registered with the ATF. But that could soon change. Under a bill introduced to Congress in January, people would be allowed to purchase silencers like they do any firearm at a licensed dealer, with only a background check. The $200 tax would be eliminated. Supporters of the bill, called the Hearing Protection Act, say silencers are a tool to protect the ears of arm owners and make the shooting experience more enjoyable. In a document leaked earlier this year, the ATF's Deputy Director, Ronald Turk, suggested that the agency consider loosening restrictions on silencers, noting that few crimes are committed using the devices, and processing so many applications puts a strain on the agency. Opponents of relaxing restrictions on silencers argue that earplugs are a more effective protection, and that if silencers get into the hands of criminals, those criminals could slay victims without alerting others nearby or drawing the attention of law enforcement. Even though they are difficult to obtain, silencers have become one of the fastest-growing segments of the arm industry. In 2010, there were 285,087 registered silencers. Last year, that figure was 902,085. According to an ATF spokeswoman, solvent traps are not illegal, but if a trap has parts that the ATF deems are intended to make the device function as a silencer, it must be identified as such and appropriately regulated. According to one law enforcement source, some of the confusion about solvent traps comes from the word intended in that definition, also in the written definition on the ATF website, since it forced the ATF to venture into the murky territory of deciding not just what the item is, but how its owner plans to use it.
In effect, banning, or at a minimum, severely restricting
figures. And this is something that we should celebrate, that today's gun owner is looking a little bit less like me and more like the rest of America.
The limited exemptions are negligence, knowingly selling to somebody who's not allowed to have a firearm.
Of 22, which would include a 223, which is, largely the AR-15 round.
Several law enforcement experts interviewed said solvent traps are designed to get around rules on silencers. They said there's no need to attach a metal cylinder to the end of an armed barrel to catch solvent, when it's just as easy to hold it over a pan or a garbage can. Not everyone agrees. Stephen Howard, a Michigan-based firearms expert, often called to testify at criminal and civil trials, said there are plenty of people who legitimately use solvent traps to catch their solvent, which can spray in all directions and stain whatever it lands on if it's not contained. The fact that many solvent traps may be used as silencers was something he acknowledged, but he also mentioned that many other things, such as a potato, a Coke can, or a torch, can also be utilized in this capacity. The statement that he made was, if a bad guy wants a silencer, he is going to make one. This is merely work that the ATF can undertake to make themselves feel good and say, look what we've done, we have made you more secure. A lawyer on Long Island named Gerald Levine, who frequently represents clients who have been accused with firearms offenses, stated that purchasing a solvent trap could save someone $200, but it also puts them at danger of a lengthy prison sentence. According to what he said, I would advise an arm owner to never possess or sell such items, specifically because of the reaction that the ATF is having. The case against Dark Side Defense was mentioned in an internal newsletter published by the ATF. The newsletter focused on the fact that the agency had confiscated the company's website, which is an innovative method for agents. According to the report, the ATF conducted a search of the source code of the website itself, which it equated to conducting a background check on a website. The search revealed that the proprietor had inserted phrases such as silencer and suppressor in the metadata of the website. According to the internal newsletter, this indicates that if a person were to type the terms into a search engine, the website of Dark Side Defense would have a greater probability of appearing in the results. According to the newsletter, agents also searched social media and carried out searches on email accounts and IP addresses in order to determine who had purchased the solvent traps from Dark Side Defense. According to what was stated in the newsletter, some of the components made their way into the possession of individuals who are not permitted to own firearms.
It seems like a fairly strong statement. Do you still stand by that, Mark?
In this issue. But here's the facts. Due to ATF's unilateral and unconstitutional action,
Joe Biden stood on the debate stage with all the other Democratic candidates and said, the firearm industry is the enemy.
And I was sharing with you my knowledge of a program in which ATF has defined this term.
Solvent traps to be suppressors. Diversified Machine, a firm that sells solvent traps, was recently subjected to a raid by the ATF. Solvent traps are devices that are utilized to clean firearms and prevent toxic chemicals from being released into the environment. The ATF was under the impression that the solvent trap used by Diversified Machine had a dimpled end, which would make it simpler to drill it out and transform it into a suppressor. The majority of solvent traps, on the other hand, do not come with dimpled ends. Through the use of the appropriate machining and tools, it is possible to legally transform solvent traps into suppressors. Individuals who lawfully construct their own suppressors by submitting a Form 1 to the ATF have formed communities on Facebook and Reddit. These communities comprise individuals who make their own suppressors. Prior to the operation, the ATF had not issued any instructions regarding solvent traps. Individuals were free to possess them without any restrictions. To numerous individuals who had acquired these solvent traps, the ATF wrote a letter in January 2022 accusing them of attempting to acquire suppressor parts. The letter was sent to those individuals. The ATF is reportedly telling those who wish to create a homemade suppressor that the part from which they want to make a silencer already matches the National Firearm Association's definition of a silencer. This is according to the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition, which alleges that the ATF is mass denying such individuals. According to the FRAC, it is against the law for anybody to possess a silencer that was manufactured or transmitted in violation of the National Firearms Act. In addition to proposing a regulation change to declare the hollow tube itself a silencer, there have been rumors that the ATF is about to release new restrictions pertaining to solvent traps and suppressor home builds. These allegations have been circulating for some time. As a result of this move, solvent traps would be absolutely prohibited, and businesses that offer them would be forced out of business. The repercussions of this modification are much more far-reaching than simply taking into consideration the metal tubing of the solvent trap as a suppressor. Quiet Bore, a company that sells solvent trap kits, have published their instructions from the ATF, which appears to have changed its view on solvent traps and now deems a 6-inch stretch of metal tubing to be a suppressor based on intention to create, manufacture, make a silencer. Quiet Bore is a company that offers solvent trap kits. Due to the fact that the ATF is currently working to control anything that could be made into a firearm through its new regulation on redefining what defines a frame or receiver, this overreach may result in a large number of individuals becoming felons overnight. ATF claims solvent traps were always unregistered silencers. For years, people have been purchasing solvent traps and following ATF procedures to legally convert the devices into suppressors by filling out an ATF Form 1, paying for a $200 tax stamp, and going through all the checks and balances. The ATF has recently started rejecting all applications to make a suppressor. In a letter written to federal firearms licensees on November 20, the Bureau claims that solvent traps never existed under federal law, and most have always been unregistered silencers. Solvent traps are devices used to catch fluids from cleaning firearms. The device attaches to the barrel of an arm. These traps can be purchased from various retailers, notably Chinese websites like AliExpress and Wish.
Uphold and defend the Constitution, and he's calling me and my industry, which provides the law enforcement and the military their fire.
That is not a priority.
Okay, here's the problem we have. Here's the problem we have. Okay, you ran for Ohio Attorney General in 2018.
All the policies that he's laid out are demonstrating that he is doing everything that he will to destroy this industry.
And in those cases, firearms dealers on the southwest border are required to make a multiple sale report.
Many Americans purchase these items to legally convert solvent traps into suppressors, but the ATF claims the term does not exist in its regulations. Solvent traps are marketed as devices that attach to firearm barrels to catch excess solvent used when cleaning firearms, the letter reads. ATF has not classified any device as a solvent trap because that term does not exist in the relevant federal statutes or implementing regulations. The ATF asserts that some devices marketed as solvent traps are suppressors because they have objective design features and characteristics that can be used to cut down on the decibels a firearm produces. The Bureau also looks at the individual parts to determine if a solvent trap crosses the line of being a silencer. One example the ATF gives is if there is an indentation that can be used as a drill guide. The agency states that these index markings have no purpose other than showing users where to drill to convert a solvent trap into a suppressor. This reasoning is similar to the ATF stating that an AR-15 with an index mark for the third hole is considered a mash gun. The ATF says that the solvent trap might still be a silencer even without indexing. Other features that the ATF says make a solvent trap a suppressor are baffles, spacers, ported inner sleeve or tube, expansion chamber, end caps, and dampening material. In the eyes of the ATF, any of these could turn a law-abiding citizen into a felon, facing 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. This penalty is the same as being caught with an unregistered mash gun. Other such characteristics may include baffles, spacers, ported inner sleeve or tube, expansion chambers, end caps, and dampening material, depending on the particular design of the device, the ATF says. While increasing the effectiveness of a firearm silencer, these same objective design features offer no advantages in collecting or filtering cleaning solvent. The ATF says that end caps by themselves are suppressors, even if an end cap is the only part an end user has. The ATF clearly believes that a silencer does not have to be complete or functional before the owner crosses the line. Just the mere possession of a single part can send a person to prison if the ATF decides to prosecute. The ATF also claims that users with solvent traps cannot legally convert them into suppressors even if they complete the proper paperwork. Its reasoning is the originating company already created an unregistered suppressor and didn't go through the appropriate steps to transfer it. Once those steps are skipped, they can never be made legal in the eyes of the ATF. Over the years, many companies involved in marketing such solvent traps have asserted that they are permitted to manufacture, transfer, or import these items because they are not yet complete and therefore do not qualify as firearm silencers under federal law, the ATF writes. However, this assertion is incorrect because a component of a firearm silencer need not be fully functional before it is recognized as a part intended only for use in assembling or fabricating a firearm silencer. Another issue facing solvent trap owners is that most items are imported from China. According to the ATF, a suppressor cannot be imported, although a few exceptions exist. None of those exceptions apply to the civilian populations. Both the GCA 18 U.S.C. 922-1 and NFA 26 U.S.C. 5844 generally prohibit the importation of firearm silencers, except under certain authorized exceptions and with required licensing and registration, the letter reads. The ATF asks anyone with a solvent trap to contact their local field office to divest themselves from the device. If a user is unsure if their solvent trap qualifies as a suppressor, the ATF also asks the owner to contact the field office. The ATF doesn't mention any immunity for the owner.
Weapons ban is constitutional. So we know dangerous and unusual weapons are outside the scope altogether.
I believe, to infringe upon good law-abiding Americans' rights, and you're going to turn them into criminals with this regulation, and you seem to have no remorse about it.
Analogous historical tradition of regulating weapons that would make an assault weapons ban.
Where they were labeling their weapons. Would there be a label on the wall for assault weapon?
ATF's recent determination on solvent traps. About solvent traps, FFLs haven't had many solvent traps, but there has been a surge in marketing on various social media platforms in the past couple of years. About a year ago, the ATF made a statement that there would be no Form 1 submissions for suppressors, which was disappointing. Now, it seems they are taking a tough stance on anyone possessing parts, pieces, tubes, caps, or anything they deem as potentially part of a suppressor. This information comes from a letter sent to all FFLs on the 20th, just before the holiday. The ATF recently examined devices commonly marketed as solvent traps and determined that some of them qualify as firearm silencers under the GCA and NFA. Solvent traps are typically advertised as devices that attach to firearm barrels to catch excess solvent during weapon cleaning. The term solvent trap is not found in any applicable federal statutes or implementing rules. Despite being marketed as such, the ATF has classified several devices as firearm silencers. It's emphasized that the GCA and NFA regulations, enacted by Congress, determine whether an item is a silencer, not the label used by the manufacturer or retailer. This development indicates a shift in the ATF's approach, and it appears they are taking a comprehensive view, considering any combination of parts as potentially falling under the regulatory purview of firearm silencers. The impact of this shift and the potential consequences for those in possession of such items will likely unfold over time. Understanding ATF classification of solvent traps and firearm suppressors. According to 18 U.S.C. 921 Alpha 25 and 26 U.S.C. 5845 Alpha 7, a firearm suppressor or firearm silencer is defined as any device designed for suppressing, muffling, or reducing the report of a portable firearm. This includes any combination of parts created or modified with the intent of being used in the construction or assembly of a firearm silencer or fire muffler, as well as any part specifically created for such use. While solvent traps are typically marketed for purposes other than functioning as firearm silencers, such as filtering firearm cleaning solvent, this marketing claim is not determinative under the mentioned statutes. Some devices marketed as solvent traps have been deemed firearm silencers due to objective design features and characteristics that suggest their intent to reduce the report of a portable firearm.
This government can protect its own people, except for 36 out of every 100,000 for murders.
Changed so significantly since 1791.
So, yes, just a bit, right?
Types of disputes that would be settled by people yelling at each other, maybe engaging in a fist fight, are being settled with guns.
I'm just inspired by the next generation. I think it's a time for a big change.
Still consistent with the Second Amendment, even on the Supreme Court's reading of what it includes.
In determining whether a device qualifies as a silencer, the ATF is obligated to consider the objective design elements of the equipment, including the purposes for which a portion may be used. The ATF uses the Sig Sauer branding case as an illustrative example. In this context, a hole that serves no purpose in collecting solvent or debris and is contrary to the purported use of a solvent trap is a clear indicator that the device may be properly classified as a firearm silencer. Notably, holes or marks indicating where holes should be drilled to allow the passage of a projectile are significant indicators. This is because such openings permit propellant gases to expand and cool. The presence of indexing marks for drilling a hole is just one type of evidence. It is not the sole requirement for a weapon silencer to be classified. The ATF is emphasizing a comprehensive examination of design features and characteristics when determining the classification of devices marketed as solvent traps. Legal implications and guidance. Other characteristics contributing to the classification of a device as a firearm silencer may include baffles, spacers, ported inner sleeves or tubes, expansion chambers, end caps, and dampening materials, depending on the specific design of the device. While these features enhance the effectiveness of a firearm silencer, they offer no advantage in collecting or filtering cleaning solvent. Here's a picture of a device marketed as a solvent trap, but classified as a silencer by the ATF. The stackable components on the right side are identified as baffles. Over the years, companies marketing such solvent traps have argued that they are allowed to manufacture, transfer, or import these items because they are not yet complete and therefore do not qualify as firearm silencers under federal law. However, the ATF asserts that a component of a firearm silencer need not be fully functional before being recognized as a part intended for use in assembling or fabricating a firearm silencer. For instance, a silencer end cap falls under the federal definition of a firearm silencer or firearm muffler at 18 U.S.C. 924A25. Therefore, it is regulated as a silencer under both the GCA and NFA, even when sold and transferred individually, not installed as a component part of a silencer. Federal courts have ruled that a device can be considered a silencer for the purposes of 18 U.S.C. 921A25, even if it is not operable in its current state.
Since you rewrote the rules of asylum based on the perceived degree of violence in these countries,
Finds that reasoning persuasive, the things like analogies to regulations of Bowie knives and billy
I want to be clear, this wasn't based on violence. This is based on threats specifically to individuals, on gangs.
and I think it's unclear about how some of the justices, specifically Justice Amy Coney Barrett or Chief.
This aligns with Congress's intention to regulate all devices designed and intended to be used as silencers, not just those currently in a completed state. Solvent trap devices that are classified as silencers cannot be registered with the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record by individual purchasers. The NFA mandates that the manufacturer, importer, or maker shall register each firearm they manufacture, import, or make. Therefore, manufacturing firearm silencers for transfer to individuals who have applied to make the same firearm by filing an ATF Form 1 is unlawful. Importantly, the GCA and NFA generally prohibit the importation of firearm silencers except under certain authorized exceptions and with requiring licensing and registration. Current possessors of solvent traps classified as silencers are encouraged to contact the ATF for further guidance on how to divest possession. If you are unsure whether the device you possess is a firearm silencer as defined by the GCA and NFA, please contact your local ATF field office. However, it is strongly advised not to contact the ATF directly. Instead, seek legal advice to ensure proper handling of any potential legal issues. In conclusion, if you have any questions or concerns related to the contents of this letter, it is recommended to consult with a lawyer specializing in Second Amendment issues. Calling the ATF independently may lead to self-incrimination, and legal counsel can guide you on the appropriate course of action. Stay informed and seek professional advice to navigate this complex regulatory landscape. That's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.